You feel it, don't you? When he goes quiet suddenly, like you're not even there, messages slow down, attention disappears, and you're left wondering what you did wrong. But here's the truth, you didn't do anything wrong, you're just being tested. And most people fail this moment because they chase, explain, overthink, and beg for clarity that was never meant to be given. This is where your value gets measured, not in words, but in how you respond when you're ignored, dismissed, or treated like an option. This is the moment that defines your standards and your self-respect completely. Listen carefully, because this isn't about playing games or trying to outsmart anyone. This is about understanding human behavior and protecting your dignity. When someone pulls back, your instinct is to move closer. But that's exactly where you lose power. Real strength is emotional discipline, knowing when to pause, when to stay silent, and when to let people reveal who they really are through their actions. You don't chase attention, you observe it and decide if it deserves. You say it's something. You demonstrate every single time pressure shows up in your daily behavior. When someone goes silent on you, your mind starts racing. You check your phone more often, replay your last conversation, wonder if you said something wrong, and before you know it, you're creating problems that didn't even exist. That silence feels like rejection, but it's not always rejection, it's observation. He's watching without saying a word, watching how quickly you panic, how fast you lose your composure, how easily you abandon your own standards just to feel reassured again. Most people fail right here because they react emotionally instead of strategically. They double text. They send long paragraphs trying to fix something that hasn't even been explained. They start proving their worth to someone who hasn't even questioned it out loud. And in doing that, they reveal insecurity. Not because they care, but because they don't trust themselves to be okay without immediate validation. That's what's really being tested. Your ability to sit in uncertainty without losing your sense of self-see. Silence creates space. And in that space, two things happen. Either you fill it with anxiety or you hold it with confidence. When you rush to fill it, you're telling him, I need your attention to feel secure. When you hold it, you're saying, I'm good whether you're here or not. And that difference, that's everything. Because people don't respect what feels dependent. They respect what feels grounded, calm, and self-assured. Now let's get practical. Imagine he used to text you every day and suddenly he disappears for a while. The average reaction is to chase, hey, is everything okay? Did I do something? Why are you acting different? That reaction comes from fear. Fear of losing him, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. But here's the reality. If someone's interest is real, it doesn't need constant chasing to stay alive. And if it disappears that quickly, your chasing won't bring it back in a healthy way anyway. Instead, you shift your focus. You don't ignore your feelings, but you don't let them control your behavior either. You stay in your routine. You keep your energy balanced. You don't drop everything just because he pulled back. You observe, not from a place of waiting, but from a place of awareness. You start asking better questions. Not why is he doing this to me? But is this behavior something I accept in my life? That shift is powerful because now you're not trying to pass his test. You're evaluating him too. Silence stops being something that weakens you and starts becoming something that reveals him. Is he consistent? Is he intentional? Does he show up with clarity? Or does he disappear when things require effort? You can't see any of that clearly if you're too busy chasing him down. Another thing people misunderstand is thinking silence means you should also play games. That's not what this is about. This isn't about pretending not to care or forcing distance to create attraction. This is about being naturally unbothered because your life doesn't revolve around someone else's attention. There's a difference between strategic silence and emotional stability. One is manipulation. The other is self-respect. And let's be honest, people test boundaries all the time, consciously or unconsciously. Not always in a malicious way, but as a way to understand what they can get away with. If every time he pulls back, you move closer, he learns that distance makes you chase. If every time he goes quiet, you stay centered, he learns that your attention isn't something he can control whenever he feels like it. That's how patterns are formed. You also have to understand that not every silence deserves patience. Sometimes silence is clarity. Sometimes it's inconsistency, lack of effort, or emotional unavailability showing itself without explanation. And when you're not reacting emotionally, you can actually see the difference. You can tell when someone is genuinely busy versus when they're just not prioritizing you. But you only gain that clarity when you stop trying to force communication and start observing behavior. Your strength in these moments isn't about being cold or distant. It's about being steady. You don't need to withdraw your personality or become someone else. You just don't collapse under pressure. You don't let temporary silence make you question your permanent value. That's the mistake. Tying your worth to someone else's temporary behavior. Because the truth is, the test isn't really about him figuring you out. It's about you proving to yourself that you won't break your own standards just to keep someone's attention. That you won't overextend, overexplain, or overchase just to feel chosen. You already decide your value before anyone else gets the chance to measure it. And once you operate from that mindset, silence stops being uncomfortable. It becomes informative. It shows you who's consistent, who's intentional, and who only shows up when it's convenient. It separates real interest from temporary attention. And most importantly, it shows you whether you're dealing with someone who adds to your life or someone who constantly makes you question your place in it. Chasing feels natural when you like someone. That urge to reach out, to keep the conversation alive, to fix the distance the moment you feel it, it comes from wanting connection. But what most people don't realize is that attraction doesn't grow from pursuit alone. It grows from space, curiosity, and the feeling that someone chooses you freely, not because they're being pulled or pressured into it. The moment you start chasing too hard, you remove that element completely. When you over-pursue, you shift the balance without noticing it. Instead of both people investing, one starts carrying the weight. You initiate more, you respond faster, you try harder to keep things interesting, and slowly, the other person leans back. Not always because they're a bad person, but because human nature responds to effort imbalance. When something comes too easily, without any uncertainty, it loses tension. And tension is a big part of attraction. Think about it in real terms. If every time he takes a step back, you take two forward, what does that teach him? It teaches him that no matter what he does, you'll maintain the connection. That he doesn't have to show up fully because you'll compensate for it. That he can give the bare minimum and still keep your attention. And once that pattern sets in, it becomes your new normal. You giving more, him giving less. This is about playing hard to get or pretending you don't care. It's about matching energy. If he's consistent, engaged, and present, you meet him there. But if he pulls back, becomes inconsistent, or stops putting in effort, you don't fill that gap for him. You let the space exist because that space does something important. It forces him to either step up or drift away. And both outcomes give you clarity. Chasing blurs that clarity. It keeps people around longer than they should be, not because they're right for you, but because you're holding the connection together by yourself. You start confusing your effort with his interest. You think, we talk all the time, but you don't stop to ask who is actually making that happen. You think there's something real building, but in reality, it's being carried by your consistency alone. There's also something deeper happening psychologically. When you chase, you start operating from a mindset of lack. You feel like you have to secure his attention like it might disappear if you don't maintain it constantly. That energy comes through, even if you don't say it directly. People can sense when you're trying to hold on to them versus when you're simply choosing them. And those two energies create completely different dynamics. Now imagine the opposite. You like someone, but you don't chase. You engage, you show interest, but you don't overextend. If he slows down, you don't panic. You continue living your life, focusing on your priorities, staying emotionally steady. That creates a different kind of presence. It shows that your attention has value, that it's not something you hand out endlessly, regardless of how you're treated. It creates space for him to come toward you willingly, without pressure. And here's where most people struggle. They think if they don't chase, they'll lose him. But the truth is, if someone only stays because you're constantly pulling them in, you never really had them. You had their attention, not their intention. Real interest doesn't need to be chased down repeatedly. It shows up, it invests, it makes an effort to stay connected without you having to remind it every step of the way. You also have to look at what chasing does to you internally. It puts you in a reactive position. Your mood starts depending on how he responds. If he replies quickly, you feel good. If he takes longer, you feel anxious. If he pulls away, you feel the need to fix it. That's not balance. That's emotional dependency building slowly over time. And the more you chase, the more control you give away without realizing it. Breaking that pattern requires discipline. Not silence for the sake of strategy, but restraint based on self-awareness. You pause before reacting. You ask yourself, am I reaching out because I genuinely want to, or because I feel like I have to keep his attention? That question alone changes your behavior. It makes you intentional instead of impulsive. There's also a difference between showing effort and overinvesting. Effort is healthy, it's mutual, it flows both ways, and it feels natural. Overinvesting is one-sided. It feels like you're constantly doing more, thinking more, trying more, and chasing always leads to overinvesting because it's driven by fear, not balance. And let's be real, attraction thrives on choice. When someone chooses to come toward you, when they put in effort without being pushed, it feels different. It feels genuine. But when you chase, you remove that choice. You create a situation where they don't have to decide anything because you're already doing the work for both of you. That's why stepping back isn't losing power, it's regaining it. It puts responsibility back where it belongs. It allows you to see who meets you halfway and who only stays when you carry them. It protects your energy from being poured into situations that aren't equally invested. Because at the end of the day, attraction isn't built on who tries the hardest. It's built on mutual effort, respect, and the freedom to choose each other without pressure. And the moment you stop chasing is the moment you start seeing things clearly. Who's really interested? Who's just comfortable? And who was never going to meet you where you stand? Emotional control isn't about pretending you don't feel anything. It's about feeling everything and still choosing how you respond. That's where most people lose their power. They think strength means reacting fast, expressing everything immediately, clearing confusion right away. But real strength is restraint. It's the ability to sit in discomfort without letting it control your actions. Because the moment your emotions start dictating your behavior, you're no longer in charge. Your feelings are. When pressure shows up, delayed replies, mixed signals, sudden distance, your emotions naturally spike. You feel uncertainty, frustration, maybe even insecurity. That's normal. What's not helpful is acting on those feelings instantly. Sending that long message, demanding clarity, reacting with attitude, or trying to force reassurance. Those reactions don't solve the situation. They expose your emotional dependence on it. And once that's visible, the dynamic shifts. A person who can't control their emotional reactions becomes predictable. And predictability in this context weakens your position. If someone knows exactly how you'll react every time they pull back, that you'll chase, question, or get upset, they don't have to adjust their behavior. They can move however they want, knowing you'll respond in a way that keeps the connection alive. That's not balance. That's you adapting to them while they remain unchanged. Emotional control interrupts that pattern. It creates space between what you feel and what you do. You still notice the shift. You still register the change in energy, but instead of reacting, you observe. You pause. You give yourself time to understand what's actually happening before you decide how to respond. That pause alone separates reactive behavior from intentional behavior. Let's put it into a real life situation. You send a message, and hours go by with no response. Your mind immediately starts filling in the blanks. He's ignoring me. He's losing interest. He's talking to someone else. Those thoughts trigger emotion, and that emotion pushes you toward action. But here's where control comes in. You don't act on the first version of the story your mind creates. You let time pass. You let reality reveal itself instead of trying to force an answer out of uncertainty. And often what happens? He replies later, casually, like nothing was wrong. Now imagine if you had already reacted emotionally, sent multiple texts, questioned his behavior, or showed frustration. Now the situation isn't just about a delayed reply, it's about your reaction to it. You've shifted the focus from his inconsistency to your response. And that rarely works in your favor. Control keeps things clean. It keeps your dignity intact. It prevents small situations from turning into unnecessary conflicts. More importantly, it protects your peace. Because when you're constantly reacting, you're constantly unsettled. Your emotional state becomes tied to external behavior you can't control. There's also a deeper level to this. Emotional control builds internal confidence. Not the kind that comes from validation, but the kind that comes from knowing you can handle uncertainty without falling apart. That you don't need immediate answers to feel secure. That your sense of self isn't shaken by someone else's temporary inconsistency. People with strong emotional control don't rush to label situations. They don't jump to conclusions. They watch patterns. They give things enough time to reveal themselves. That patience isn't passive, it's intentional. It allows them to respond based on reality, not assumption. And here's something important. Emotional control doesn't mean tolerating bad behavior. It doesn't mean staying silent when something clearly crosses your standards. It means choosing the right moment and the right way to address it instead of reacting in the heat of emotion. There's a difference between a calm, direct conversation and an emotionally charged reaction. One commands respect. The other often creates defensiveness. You also start to notice how control affects the way others treat you. When you're not easily shaken, when you don't react impulsively, when you maintain composure, even under pressure, it changes the dynamic. People become more aware of how they approach you. Not because you demand it loudly, but because your behavior sets a tone. It communicates that you're not someone who can be thrown off balance easily. This doesn't happen overnight. It takes awareness and practice. It means catching yourself in moments where you want to react and choosing differently. It means sitting with uncomfortable feelings instead of immediately trying to escape them through action. It means learning to separate temporary emotion from long-term behavior. And yes, it can feel unnatural at first, especially if you're used to expressing everything immediately. But over time, it becomes your default. You start to realize that not every feeling needs a reaction. Not every situation needs to be addressed instantly. Some things just need time to unfold. Because when you control your emotions, you control your energy. And when you control your energy, you control how you show up. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. You stop chasing clarity and start allowing it to reveal itself. You stop trying to manage every situation and start choosing which ones actually deserve your attention. That's real power. Not loud, not dramatic, not forced. Just steady, grounded, and unshaken. Standards aren't something you announce, they're something you live. You can talk all day about what you deserve, what you won't tolerate, how you expect to be treated, but none of that means anything if your actions don't back it up. People don't listen to your words as much as they study your behavior. They watch what you allow, what you excuse, what you keep entertaining, even after it shows you clear signs of inconsistency. That's where your real standards are revealed. Every interaction teaches someone how to treat you, not in theory, but in real time. If he cancels plans last minute and you immediately accept it without question, you've just shown that your time is flexible for him. If he disappears for days and comes back like nothing happened, and you welcome him back without addressing it, you've shown that inconsistency has no consequence. If he gives you minimal effort and still gets your full attention, you've taught him that he doesn't need to do more. This isn't about being strict or rigid for the sake of it. It's about alignment. Your standards should match your self-worth, not your fear of losing someone. Because when fear is in control, your standards start to drop quietly. You make exceptions, you justify behavior, you tell yourself it's not a big deal when deep down it actually is. And over time, those small compromises turn into a pattern where you're accepting less than what you originally wanted. People often think setting standards means giving ultimatums or making big speeches. It's not that complicated. It's in the small decisions. It's in whether you continue engaging when something feels off. It's in whether you reward behavior that doesn't meet your expectations. It's in whether you walk away from situations that don't align, even when you have feelings involved. Let's make it real. If someone only reaches out late at night, never makes real plans, and keeps things surface level, your standard is not defined by what you say you want. It's defined by whether you keep responding and participating. If you do, you're accepting that level of connection. If you don't, you're making space for something better. That choice, repeated over time, shapes your entire experience. And here's the part most people struggle with. Standards require consistency from you, not just from them. You can't expect someone to treat you with respect if you keep making exceptions every time they don't. You can't expect effort if you continue giving your energy freely without receiving it in return. Standards aren't something you enforce once. They're something you maintain through your actions repeatedly. There's also a difference between having standards and having expectations without boundaries. Expectations are what you hope for. Standards are what you require. Boundaries are what you enforce when those standards aren't met. Without boundaries, standards don't exist in practice. They stay as ideas, not reality. And people respond to reality, not intention. When you start living by your standards, something shifts, not just in how others treat you, but in how you see yourself. You stop feeling like you have to earn attention. You stop over-explaining your value. You stop negotiating basic respect because you've already decided what's acceptable and what's not, and your behavior reflects that decision. Now, does this mean you'll never lose someone? No. In fact, you might lose people faster. But that's not a loss. It's clarity, because anyone who walks away when they can't meet your basic standards was never aligned with you to begin with. Keeping them by lowering your standards only delays the inevitable and costs you more in the long run. There's also a quiet confidence that comes with this. You're not reacting to every situation emotionally. You're not trying to convince someone to treat you better. You're simply observing and deciding. If it aligns, you continue. If it doesn't, you adjust your involvement. That calm decision-making process is powerful because it shows that your self-worth isn't up for negotiation. And let's be honest, people respect what feels solid. If your standards change based on your feelings for someone, they're not really standards, they're preferences. And preferences can be ignored. But standards, when consistently upheld, create a clear structure. People know where they stand with you. And more importantly, they know what's required to stay in your life. You don't need to chase respect. You demonstrate it through how you carry yourself, how you respond, and what you allow to continue. When someone sees that your attention isn't easily given and your time isn't easily accessed, they either rise to meet that level or they fall back. And both outcomes work in your favor. Because at the end of the day, Your standards are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They're about controlling your own choices. Who you engage with, how long you stay, what you accept, and when you walk away. That's where your power actually is. Not in changing people, but in choosing what you allow to stay in your life.